Thank you, Greg. All right, y'all, it is my pleasure to introduce your host for the morning, Doug.
Yeah, good morning. I'm a drunkard. My name is Doug. I love AA, and that wasn't always so, and that sure wasn't so on the 7th day of April of 1994. My job this morning is to introduce our speaker, Don P. And I find out that I don't have a job because everybody already knows him. So I just met him last evening, but just in this short time, a couple hours we spent last night, had breakfast this morning. He's a character. He enjoys living, he enjoys life, and I'm really looking forward to hearing him talk, and I know you are too, so I'll turn it over to Don P. Let's give him a Texas welcome, okay?
Morning, my name is Don, and I am an alcoholic. I'm going to ask that you listen closely because I'm losing my voice. Like a Pandora's sweat. I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I have been continuously sober since December 26th of 1967. And I say that not to impress you with me, but I think it's time we started dispelling the myth that's running through AA today. Relapse is not a necessary part of recovery. Okay? It does occur because the nature of alcoholics is to drink alcohol. But if you're alcoholic, you don't ever have to drink again. My main job this morning that I was asked to do is to tell you about a trip we took to the Soviet Union in 1988. And to do that, I need to kind of bring you into the picture. I came into Alcoholics Anonymous in my third penitentiary. So when I run my life, I'm very clear. With me running my life, I end up in a cage. That's the best I can do. And my kids end up in foster homes, and my people end up hurt and damaged. And since I quit running my life, I've become a traveler. My bathroom at home is bigger than the cell I used to live in. And there are days just to make sure that I'm still all right. One of the tests that I give myself is I close the door and sit there and ask myself, could I live in this room for the next 10 years? And then I design it so that I could. And once I'm okay in that room, then I open the door to the rest of the house. So, works. What I'm trying to tell you is that I am not trustee material by the way that I understand trustee material. I'm a little rude and crude. In fact, when you selected me as your trustee at large back in '85, David Aronofsky called me, and I knew he would, to give me my marching orders. And he only told me two things. He said, learn the concepts in their original 1962 form, and if you see anything going on that doesn't fit that, ask questions. And if you don't get answers, pursue it. Then he said, and get a suit for the trustee-only dinner, you little son of a bitch. I'm one of the fortunate people that when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, there was only one way the group I came into did it. For 5 weeks, we weren't allowed to talk. They said if you knew anything at all, you wouldn't be here. And we gave up our yard privileges and our movies for 5 weeks, and every Saturday and Sunday we went to what they call the 12-step study school. So we were carried through the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous in 5 weeks. In the 6th week, I was given a new group, and with the big book and my sponsor's help, it was now my turn. And so my whole view of Alcoholics Anonymous is it's my sobriety in my life is none of my business. It's your business. My business is to help you. And so that was just part of what I did. So I learned to say yes. when you ask. And that's the only reason I ended up going to the Soviet Union. I'd been saying yes long enough. I ended up at the right place at the right time, and it was part of my job. As trustee at large, I was the chairman of the International Committee. That's no big deal. It's just a big deal. And the political climate at the time was still pretty shut down. The walls were still up. The mistrust was there. Mr. Gorbachev and Mr. Reagan had begun to have some dialogue, and it was an organization formed because they couldn't do it politically. The governments couldn't do it, but they were interested in better communication and dealing with problems in both countries, and the top problem in both countries is alcoholism. So they put together a team of people, this other organization. I can't remember the name of it. In fact, I can't remember very many names, so I'm just going to, you know. When you're 45, it just goes. One of the best friends that Alcoholics Anonymous has ever had was an old man named Dan Anderson, who was the president emeritus at Hazelton. And Dan was picked by both governments as the one to head up this organization because there were going to be tours back and forth as we checked them out. And the first one, the Russians invited that group with us. And Dan had said at the beginning, if you don't have AA people in these groups, it's all a waste of time. So our General Service Office manager, John Bragg, was sent to Russia with this group to see what they had. And he came back and said it was all just show and tell. They showed us what they wanted to, and they didn't tell us anything. But he was on fire. He had seen the problem, and he'd seen the possibilities of a solution, because it turns out that Mr. Gorbachev's mother was a practicing Christian. And they were beginning to open some of the religious activity very cautiously. But you know how mothers are. They were beginning to open the doors a little bit. The next visit was from a group of Russians who came to this country. And again, Dad said, if we don't have AA people with it, it's a waste of time. And the purpose of this trip is that this group of people had come so that we could spend 10 days taking them around the United States and showing them all the variety of things we do in relation to alcoholism. Treatment centers, EAP programs, whatever was dealing with alcoholism, we want them to see it. AA, Al-Anon. We split them into 3 different groups. One went up the West Coast, stopped at Disneyland. It may not be good for alcoholism, but it's good for people. And you get friendlier when Mickey Mouse is part of the deal. There was another group that went up the center of the country, which would cover Chicago, Minneapolis, and that end. And there was another group that went up the East Coast. And the members of the International Committee were to be on that team. That would be Sarah Price, who was our staff member, who was the staff secretary for the International Committee. Myself as trustee at large U.S., and Webb Johnson, who was trustee at large Canada. And we were to be on the team. And we went through the thing that you have to go through to become effective. We went in there knowing that we were the most important part of that entire operation, because we were Alcoholics Anonymous. We had the answer. And on Tuesday night in Chicago, Sarah called me from somewhere, and she echoed what I was thinking. What the hell am I doing here? This is a waste of time, because all I was doing was carrying luggage. Every time somebody asked an AA question, someone else answered it. And so I had to get my ego beat down and realize that luggage carrier is the best job in the business anyway. You get to meet everybody. So I became a luggage carrier. Now, I got to tell you a couple of funny things that happened along the way. We are not very sensitive people. not just alcoholics. We got into Chicago on May Day, 1988. Now, they celebrate May Day also in Russia, but in Russia the people won, and in Chicago the cops won. So we're trying to make friends with these Russians, and we take them into a place where the police are parading and the statues are all policemen, and kind of threw them a little bit. And I just got tired of the whole business, and our driver in Chicago was an old black jazz musician who was a friend of mine. And so I just started rapping with him, and the interpreter pretty soon started translating what we were doing, and the Russian tank commander that I was hosting began to engage in it, and we finally got, because he and I were laughing, nobody else was laughing. So we made our first contact there. Then he and I that evening, through the interpreter, had a talk. We have to find common ground wherever we go. That's the essence of the 12-step. In whatever activity, if I'm going to communicate with you, we have to find common ground. Well, he and I discovered common ground. During the siege of Leningrad, he was a smuggler. Smuggled guns and food and stuff in that. And in 1966, I was a smuggler also. The product was different, but the job was the same. So we had our first real connection. We had something we could talk about. We got to Minneapolis, and I was really tired. This show and tell stuff is terrible. A breakfast meeting with people who are showing off their way, and then a short break, and then a quick run to another place. 6 or 7 of these breakfast dinners and show and tell things, and I'm just tired of it. So I called old Don Bruner, who was at the time the head of service up in Minnesota, and I went out to their house and spent the night out there, canceled my hotel room, and played cribbage and went to a meeting. And the next morning, my little Russian tank commander asked me where I'd been, and I told him I'd gone and played cribbage and went to a meeting. He said, I wish I'd have gone with you. We had 2 more of these damn dinners. So we made another contact. Very important if you're going to communicate, it's one-to-one. Not country to country, it's one-to-one. When we finished back in New York, we took them to our show and tell at General Service. We let Al-Anon have them first, and then we took them and did a whole presentation. Did one on the traditions, and the Russian interpreter nudged me. And we had a big grin on her face. She says, you know what you have here is communism in its purest form. Which is true. The welfare of the group must come first. So it was kind of her opinion that we probably wouldn't have a whole lot of trouble getting our message across if we would stick to our guns. Then at the final dinner, we had gotten down, this tank commander and I had been talking. One of his purposes for making this trip, he says, my people have been at war for centuries and we're tired. We're just tired. And I don't want your grandchildren killing mine. Or mine killing yours. So we could agree on one thing. You know, let's live together in some kind of peace and harmony. Well, we learned that here. We're not the world's nicest people, in case you didn't know that. But we've learned to put up with each other's idiosyncrasies. I'm being kind this morning. A sober jerk is still a jerk. But some people change. Anyway, we got talking about families because he brought that up about families. And you end up showing pictures of your children and grandchildren and family. And I am married to probably the second most beautiful woman on the planet. I don't know who the first one is, but I don't want her ego to get clear out of shape. And this old boy took a look at my wife's picture and he said, oh my, you should go home. Said it's very dangerous to leave such a beautiful woman alone for so long. We'd been gone 10 days. So we had another, and he showed me his wife's picture. And we had a nice time there. Following that, understand I'm just kind of a country boy, and here we are with this high-level stuff. We had a debriefing. Well, both parts of this team had to sit down and discuss what we had discovered on this trip and make plans for the next one and what the goals were. That whole thing that just leaves me going. And when that was all over, their primary question is that they wanted to learn to know more about AA principles. They'd gotten the idea clearly that this worked just fine, but they want to know about the principles. So we asked them, do you think it would be of value for us to come to your country? And they, three of them took us aside from the rest of the, whoever they were, and said, yes, you must come. And here's how you do it. Don't wait for an invitation from the government because it'll just be show and tell. We began to communicate with them by mail. That was part of the inside thing. You have some names, he said. Here are some more. Begin correspondence, and then in one of your letters, just say, we're going to be in Moscow on such and such a date. We'd like to drop by and say hello. And with that, we can get the thing done. So that's the approach we took. Now, understand that your General Service Board is very careful, even though it doesn't always look like it, on how they spend your money and what activities they get into. And we had some long and very vigorous discussions on would this be promotion? When should we go? Who should go? Because among the 21 of us, not everybody liked everyone. It's just like every group. And if he's going, I don't want it to happen. I want him to go instead. And we had to get through that piece. And eventually we did. And we picked November of 1988 because that was the time the Russians said would be best. Winter wouldn't be fully on, and there was a window there. So we put together the team, the two trustees at large, the staff secretary, and we picked one non-alcoholic trustee because he would be able to talk to some people that we probably couldn't. And our job wasn't to get to the government. Our job was to talk to the treatment providers in the Soviet Union, people who were dealing with the alcoholism, and a couple government officials, because you don't do anything there, just like you don't do anything here without checking it with somebody. We made our first stop in Finland. We flew to Finland first for two reasons. We needed to get past the jet lag, and that takes a couple days. And the Finns have been carrying the AA message into Russia for years. At the end of the war, the Russians had no way to rebuild the country, so they brought the Finnish construction companies over, and every Finnish construction company had a small AA group attached to it. So we found that interesting, and we did not want to step on their toes. We wanted to utilize what they had already. They'd been sneaking the big book in Finnish. Wonderful people. Their anonymity is protected because every Finnish AA member has a nickname. And that's how they're known in AA. The man who started AA in Finland was known as Columbus. Just died last year. Wonderful guy. So we got to go to their General Service Board meeting above the Arctic Circle and participate in all of that. We got to go to a sauna. It's more than a hot room. It's a party. How you eat and you carry on. I remember we were sitting in the basement, 4 or 5 of us, in a hot room, naked, talking about AA. And it hit me that there's 4 or 5 of us sitting here naked, talking about AA. And I mentioned it. And our Finnish host says, oh yeah, it's amazing how much closer you get to the truth when the suits come off. So, I've been trying since then to get my group to do that, and it just... Our first Soviet stop was in Tallinn, Estonia. It was part of the Soviet Union. I can't talk about Russia because at the time we went, it was the Soviet Union. It was a much broader thing before the breakup. And Tallinn is right across the bay from Helsinki, so we took the ferry over. Now, there's another picture you need to get in your mind. We had carefully decided 5 different AA pamphlets that we translated into Russian to carry with us. Big box. We knew quite well that we probably wouldn't get them into the country. We took them along anyway. Is AA for you not the 40 questions, but the 20 questions? What is AA? The kind of things that they were looking for. And since I was the young one, Sarah was kind of delicate. Webb had a gimpy leg. And John Hartley Smith was just too elegant a person. So I got to carry the box along with all of my luggage. I don't mind. I'm a luggage carrier anyway. I learned that on the first trip. So when we got into Estonia at their customs, and understand I have emotional responses to customs. It has not always been a pleasant deal. And I trust in God, but I watch customs officers. I've learned to read them. So we let the other 3 members. We also had a young man named Vlad Klemenko, a young Russian man, who was a simultaneous translator. His father was alcoholic. He works the program himself. We needed to make sure whoever translated for us got the right words because they don't always translate right. In fact, the first big books they tried to translate, we had to ask them, please don't do that, because the word they used for the 12 steps was the 12 commandments. And little things like that have to be watched. We knew we weren't going to get this thing through, this box, so we let everybody else go first so there wouldn't be a delay. Then I presented my luggage and this box of literature. I had very carefully planned, I had a little penknife so that I could open the box for the customs officer. Always be nice to customs officers. And I'm so nervous, I couldn't find it. So I pulled my comb out and cut the tape with my comb, which made me look like a damn fool. Well, I'm a damn fool anyway, so it doesn't matter. This lady got going through the box, and she picked a piece of literature and read it. And then she walked away from us to a man in plain clothes standing against the wall back over there. And Vlad said to me, he's the ideology check. He will look at it, and he will decide if this stuff's going to go through or not. And he read it, and then she just walked back, and as she walked back, she stopped a soldier. There are armed people all over there. And she stopped this guy with a rifle, a soldier, and said something to him, and Vlad turned to me. With tears in his eye. She showed this to the soldier, and she said to him, "Isn't this wonderful? They are here to help us with our problem with alcoholism." Well, that's touching and noble, but what it meant is that I had to carry that damn box along. And if any of you are having trouble getting rid of literature, come see me. I found really creative ways to lighten the load. In Estonia, we met with a doctor. I think his name was Peep, Paolo Peep. He was a psychiatrist who had been working with alcoholics and had formed what was known as the Anti-Bacchus Society. You know, Bacchus was the god of drink and party. And since his contact with AA somewhere along the way, he was trying to turn his little group of anti-Bacchus people into an AA group. So he was the first one we met with. And I was deeply touched because our appointment was with him, but he brought his whole group. And we ran into the kinds of things that we went there for, the alcoholics. As we made our little presentations, there was a lady who said, I have a problem. I have read your book. She spoke a little English. And I don't know how I'm going to do this because I don't believe in God. And Sarah Price, with her great dignity, said, honey, don't you worry about it. When we got here, we didn't believe in God either. And so the lady got some hope. At that time, the treatment for alcoholism was almost prison. You lost your apartment, you lost your job, and that was very important because they assigned all those things. And you went into treatment for a year, which is more like a concentration camp. Then you were put on parole, which meant that when you went back to your town, you went on whatever job they sent you on and whatever apartment they gave you. And you had to check in with the police on a regular basis to make sure you were staying sober. And if you weren't, back for 2 more years. And if you did it the third time, it was Siberia. And they had some really interesting treatments. Antabuse, hypnosis, acupuncture, psychiatry. I loved psychiatry. My last psychiatrist was smoking marijuana with me 3 weeks after we started. Well, if you can't beat them, get them to join you, right? And one of these fellows, a man named Tom, and he was obviously distressed also. Because he told us about this rigorous thing he was under, this parole. And he was afraid. Well, I've been in prison, and I've been on parole. And he and I got to talk about that. And he said, here's my problem. On my new job, it is customary in this country that after I get my first paycheck, I must take my coworkers out and get them all drunk. It's custom. How am I going to do that and stay sober? But he had 5 other guys with him. And so I kind of told him what I was told. You may have to give up those other people. And rather than be alone, maybe these 5 guys will now become your group. They'll give you the support you need, and you'll be ostracized at work. But that's how you stay sober. And he kind of mumbled and grumbled, but the next morning when we got on the train to go up to Leningrad, he was there and he was on fire. He had hope. He carried the luggage and laughed. And that was nice. I didn't have to carry the box onto the train. So again, it was about person to person, not country to country. Leningrad's an incredible city. And it was in Leningrad when I got my first picture of the difficulty we were going to face. I don't know how many of you remember the siege of Leningrad, but several million people died because the Germans surrounded it and nothing could get in or out. And people starved to death, and then they shelled the city. It was a terrible, terrible time. And we went out to the monument that they built to that. It's about 3 blocks long. The statues are probably 4 and 5 stories high. You know how the Russian sculptors have these heroic, just huge images. And a museum in the basement describing it, and it occurred to me as we were looking at it, what they were saying to us and what we would have to overcome is that never again will any outside force ever come into our country and devastate us like we had before. Never. So they were suspicious of all new ideas. And it was in Leningrad on a Friday when the newspaper Kosmonavta Pravda had written an article that was sort of friendly to AA, but 2 officials, including my tank commander, and a fellow named Chernik, who was the head of the propaganda department, stated in the paper, we will never support Alcoholics Anonymous. It's just another imperialist way of getting into our country. And so it validated what I'd thought. We didn't know it, but that same Friday, Mr. Gorbachev had talked to these guys and said, whatever you're doing isn't working. And your jobs are on the line. You better find something real quick or you're out of work. In essence, I'm sure he isn't as crude as I am. We found out later he kind of put them on notice. And there we were. The only game in town. How many of us have come to that point? The only game left. We got lost in Leningrad. You want to talk about getting nervous. They didn't speak English. And Vlad and I, we walked to the place. The meetings we all had, instead of show and tell, were Russian tea and cookies. Much friendlier. It's a gift-giving deal. Everybody exchanges little gifts. And what we had done, because we were pretty well briefed on this, these hotels all put out these little shampoo bottles. We'd been collecting them for months because they didn't have any shampoo. And so they were delighted to get a bottle or two of this and some hand lotions. And this is what we carried with us, better than gold. And they'd give us cookies, and I've got a couple little unfinished ceramic pieces. It's gift-giving. We began to understand the Russian people themselves are really, really kind and loving and very, very spiritual. They're very suspicious of church because in their country, the church was an oppressive thing. You have Rasputin and the Mad Monk, and the church was a political thing as well as anyway. They were suspicious of it, but I had to laugh because they kept telling us, "We don't have any history of religion or God in this country. Would you like to go see the cathedrals?" They were all museums now, but they were cathedrals. So I kept my mouth shut. I found that interesting. But we got lost in Leningrad and finally found the place we were supposed to go and had another tea and cookie deal. Talked to a lot of people, and at no time did we ever have to defend Alcoholics Anonymous. While we were in Leningrad, there was a man named Shikarev had written a book about AA that was totally positive. And their way of handling things in Russia with books like that, it sold its first 50,000 in less than 2 weeks. It was gone. So there's an obvious interest. But they have a public forum where the author and government officials and anybody interested is on stage, kind of a panel, and the whole crowd, from police chiefs and regular people, whoever's interested, critiques the book. So the second edition can have necessary changes. They edit the damn thing publicly. They have group conscience, in essence. And we were invited to that meeting. And the fellow who had made the statement that we will not support Alcoholics Anonymous on Friday made a public statement that we will now investigate Alcoholics Anonymous and introduced us. And we were put to the test, and thank God I live by the Spirit and the intuitive life, because these folks began to ask us loaded questions. Have you ever been at an Ask It Basket sessions? Those aren't questions. Those are, here's how I see this. Don't you agree? Okay. Well, I'm used to that. And because I'm kind of glib, and I'm not afraid to distract you with a one-liner while I figure out what the hell to say next, I kind of became the spokesman. And I'll never forget, a lady from the crowd said, "How do you think Alcoholics Anonymous will work in the Soviet Union?" And I know right off the bat, I am in deep trouble. So I paused for a second, and I heard this come out of my mouth. I said, I really don't know. It would be presumptuous of me to even have an opinion. I've only been here 13 days. And they applauded. Because that's the truth. It's the same thing I learned in doing 12-step work. When you come to me, I don't know what you need yet. It would be presumptuous of me to decide when you get to start working the steps. I know eventually you're going to, but it's presumptuous of me because I don't know you well enough yet to know where you're at so we can get you started on the path to recovery. Same principle. We didn't have to change anything. We just had to get a new dimension. Then we went on up to Moscow. Now, the trip from Tallinn, Estonia to Leningrad was on the milk train. Oh my. Tiny little compartment, 4 bunks, 5 adults, bathroom down the hall, if you can call it that. It just dumped onto the tracks, a steel room. Really uncomfortable. The trip from Leningrad to Moscow was in a compartment. Elegant. They came by with a samovar full of tea. And I don't know why the change took place, but all of a sudden we were important to somebody, and they upgraded us to first class. In Moscow, our first contact was the Moscow Beginners Group. They were celebrating their first AA anniversary. It was a little AA group started by an insane Episcopal priest. And I can say that because he said that. He said, I'm insane, and that's why I'm effective. He says, they don't know what I'm going to do next. But he had formed a little AA group that was straight AA. Steps, traditions, they just kept it tucked in tight. One of their problems was the law at that time was that no more than 5 people could gather in one place without a permit. So they were kind of having to bootleg this thing. And it was open enough they could do that. He took us inside the Kremlin. We got to see the Georgian dancers, and we got to see Mozart's Imaginary Garden. Those are some of the perks that occurred on the trip. It was funny at the opera. They were trying to be kind to us, and they were singing it in Russian, so our translators were trying to tell us what they were saying, and the people in the back of us were going, shh, shh. And they finally shut up because you don't need to understand the language. That opera speaks for itself, at least to this country boy. We finally ran into our first Soviet officials. Now, Mr. Chernik, who had said we will not support Alcoholics Anonymous, is about 5'2" with a great shock of white hair. On first look, the minute he opens his mouth, he's 6'8". I mean, you just feel the power coming out of the man. He was the minister of propaganda, which is education over there. They're kind of the ones who decide what's going on in treatment and what gets in and out, what information gets spread. And he was friendly to us, gave us tea and cookies. And then he said, now I have in the next room, I have 14 alcoholics and their leader. They're all sober and they didn't use Alcoholics Anonymous. And we'd like you to meet them. He was being a little antagonistic. Cooperative, but antagonistic. Excuse me. And the leader had been 14 years sober. And the others were anywhere from 6 months to a year. And I saw a demonstration of some of the greatest courage I have ever seen. You have to understand at that time, you did not speak out. It was party line, period. And their leader, 14 years sober, told us a bit of his story, and then the others were to tell some of their story. And he and Mr. Chernik both said, we believe, the differences between us is that we believe after a year of good treatment, you're cured. Well, you believe that you will be alcoholic forever, and so there's a difference. And this one little old guy spoke up, and he said, I don't mean to be disrespectful, Mr. Chernik, but I am an alcoholic, and I will always be an alcoholic. And so we established some more communication. And then we were taken to some other official who actually had control over who met and where they met and what went on in this country. And this was an interrogation. They ushered us into a room, and he sat here, and we sat in chairs here, and there was a guy about where you are, just sitting there like this, pretending he was asleep, listening to every word. And we weren't worried about him listening to us. He was there to make sure this guy didn't say something wrong. I mean, this is the tone of the room. And he began to interrogate us about Alcoholics Anonymous. And I want to tell you something about the team that went. Somehow we all got into the spirit and left all of our personal agendas and our fears and our ideas at home and never once had to defend Alcoholics Anonymous. It doesn't need defended. Webb was a financial man, and I watched him set aside a personal interest that could have made him wealthy forever. Because at that time, there was no exchange between rubles and American dollars, and he could have taken some dollars over there and come back a rich man. And I watched him struggle with that, naturally, and he set that aside. No defenses. This guy interrogated us. And we just answered his questions. He was particularly interested in the traditions. Want to know, well, how is it you pick your leaders? Well, some people show up and we ask them if they'll do it, and they say yes. He says, well, what if they don't show up? He says, sometimes we pick them anyway. When we were all through with our interrogation by this man, he said, how can we help you get this started here? I said, give them space. And I meant specifically, give them some space to meet in, and then give them some room to grow. Give them some space. This was the day, or 2 days before Thanksgiving of 1988. And on Thanksgiving Day, in the building that they owned, they allowed a big AA meeting to take place with the Moscow Beginners Group and a couple of the underground groups who hadn't even come forward yet, where I had one of those spiritual experiences. They talked in Russian and we talked in English, so there was an interpreter between us. I'd say something, you'd interpret it to him, and then he'd say something and you'd interpret it back to me. And I found a wonderful thing, because while he's talking, I don't have to listen. I can be thinking about what he just said last time, and then start listening when you come at me, and it gave me a whole new way of listening that stood me in good stead when I went to Japan, because I had to do the same thing in Japan. And I had learned by then, I can listen really well when you're not talking. And you can listen better when I'm not talking. Play with that in the middle of the night when you can't sleep. And it was a second step meeting that day. And a young fellow who was in the newspaper business, who had lost his job, name was Sasha. As he talked, he said, I truly had no history of God at all in my life. I'd never heard of it. But I wanted to be sober, and I listened to these people, and I just did what they said. And what I found was a spiritual source within myself. That was my experience also. So the message got carried clean and clear. It doesn't matter about language. It doesn't matter about presentation. It doesn't matter how you look. The message gets carried. Then we got an invitation to the American Embassy for Thanksgiving. Because while they celebrate May Day, they don't know from turkeys. And we had been eating mystery meat and potatoes for about 15 days. Oh, yeah, you have no idea how interesting eating in Russia those days was. Cars on the street had no windshield wipers. And we asked them why. I said, well, we don't have any spare parts, so when you park, you take your windshield wipers with you, or you won't have them when you get back. We went to a restaurant to eat, and as we went down the menu, the waiter just kept saying, well, the truck hasn't got here yet. We don't have that. And we'd end up with mystery meat and potatoes. I thought there'd be a hell of a business if they ever got free in carrying potatoes into town. Trucking. We were invited to the American Embassy, and it turns out the charge d'affaires and his wife were both AA members. So we not only had a nice turkey dinner, we had a nice visit with AA people. And that's when they were building that new embassy building, and they had just discovered the whole place was bugged. As they built it, they put the bugs in. He said there are about 10,000 people in Moscow whose only job is to listen in. So what are we going to do with meetings? Well, our opinion was let them listen. But statistically, that means there's at least 1,200 of them are alcoholic. So let them listen. What do we have to hide? Okay. There is so much that I would wish to tell you about this trip. It was multidimensional. There was the mission, there was the AA stuff, there were the personal things I was going through and the personal things the group itself was going through. Became fast friends with Clemenco. We just enjoy each other. This is a remarkable human being. I watched as one language went in here and another one came out here simultaneously. He's a brilliant young activist. He's just in trouble everywhere. But part of his experience was that his grandfather was one of the people that was purged by Stalin, which meant they were not only were they killed, they were wiped out. No records existing. There's no history for him, and human beings need history. And while he was there, he discovered a cousin, and I got to watch him reestablish some links. And since then, he's told me they have found all kinds of things. They even found some records of his grandpa that somebody missed. And so there was that experience that went along with it. I came home far richer than when I left, with an absolute trust for AA. And what we came back with in our own little debriefing as we talked with each other, it became clear to us the only thing those people needed was the big book. They had the passion. Got it at the Moscow Beginners Group. There was a young fellow came to me. He was 6 weeks sober, and they were getting ready to do their first corrections panel. And he wanted to know how to do that. They were going to have it on TV and everything. So we were able to share with him about backlighting and don't talk to inmates. You're there to talk to alcoholics, not inmates. And he's still on fire. The translating of the big book was difficult because Bill wrote in New England American, which hardly anybody speaks. I've been reading the big book in prisons for years, and a couple times the guy said, "I don't have the slightest idea what you just said." So you have to change the words a little bit. Don't get lineal. There was a lady named Julia who was an American English teacher in the Russian schools. And she was a member of the fellowship, and she had been translating the big book. And we had, part of our difficulties, we had to go, there were several groups going to Russia at this time. They were all sneaking in mimeographed sheets of the book that were not good translations. And we had to lovingly ask people, stop doing that, please, while we get this thing put together so the spirit of AA is intact. So she did it. What General Service has done since is that we established a policy that after a translation shows up, we have it checked by a translation bureau, professionals. It costs us a little bit of money, but at least it's intact. And we discovered another thing that we didn't know we had been doing. It was our policy at that time that any country that was developing AA, as soon as they had their own General Service office or even a publishing operation, we would let them translate the big book. We didn't realize what we were saying is all you need to get sober is the big book, and as soon as you're sober enough, we'll give it to you. That's really what we were saying, and didn't even know it. So we changed that policy. We now have on file, in any country that's emerging, we do the translation, so when they're ready, it's there for them. And then we let them go ahead and publish it. Little changes like that are some of the things we discovered on our little trip. We're trying to carry the message, but don't give it to them too soon. My daughter, when we started the trip, my 13-year-old daughter said, "Dad, I really wish you didn't have to go. I'm afraid they might not let you come back." And I said, "Honey, don't worry about it. I have behaviors I haven't even used yet that are guaranteed to get me kicked out anywhere." I don't mind being deported. I was faced with a passport problem. See, one of my federal convictions was conspiracy to transport untaxed marijuana, smuggling. And they're reluctant to give people like me a passport. They're reluctant to have me show up across state lines. And I was told, don't worry about it. We have some contacts in D.C. We can get you a passport. And I said, don't do that. Let's see what God does with this. And I just made an application like everybody else, and I got a passport. No drama even. Just, it's irritating. There should be some drama. If you have the opportunity to read the foreword to the Russian Big Book in English, please take it. It's some of the finest writing I have ever read because it explains clearly God to people who don't have any history of God. It explains the Spirit in ways that I wish I had written that. You can get it from General Service, and it should be in a pamphlet all of its own. It's so well done. This little 2-year-old English teacher put that together so that it became acceptable to make the journey. Great 12-step tool. We're just about out of time. I have about 3 more hours worth of stories. But I don't want to take up all that time here. Know this. Carrying the message to the Soviet Union was no different than carrying the message to Larimer Street in Denver. We walked cautiously, we walked carefully, we wanted to find out, do you really want to hear this? And then when they did, we just gave it to them straight with no defenses, no justifications. This is the deal. To the best of my knowledge, the last time I checked, there were over 185 groups registered in Russia itself, and there's more going on all the time. The most fun was I got a letter from one of the young men of the Moscow Beginners Group just a few weeks after I got back. He said, we now have 3 groups. There was disagreement between some of us and the leadership of the Moscow Beginners Group. So they started a group in someone's home and another one in that 7,000-bed hospital in Moscow. And that's how it works. All it takes is a pot of tea and a couple cookies, and you got a new group. Thank you.